Elliot, thank you for your patience. Give us a few minutes and we will get underway. All right, good afternoon. In a short while, we will be joined by our friend Elliot Harris, who, as you know, is the UN's chief economist. And he is here along with Anne Noorgam, the chair of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, as well as Rosemary Lane, the officer in charge of the Indigenous Peoples Development Branch Division for inclusive social development in DESA. She will also be there. They will brief you virtually on the launch of the State of the World's Indigenous Peoples, Volume 5. A couple of humanitarian situations I want to flag for you. Continuing on Yemen, I think you all heard from David Beasley earlier. Our colleagues at the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs reports that the humanitarian situation is worsening in Yemen's Marib Governorate, with fighting continuing along multiple front lines. The violence has forced up to 15,000 people to flee since early February. Roughly 60% of them are reportedly residing in informal settlements and crowded sites where services are overstretched. Humanitarian organizations are providing assistance, including support to both newly displaced and existing vulnerable internally displaced people in camp-like settings. Across Yemen, more than 20 million people, 20.7 to be more exact, need humanitarian assistance. Many of them are at the brink of starvation. They are the ones who are paying the highest price in this war. We continue to call for an immediate end to hostilities and a nationwide ceasefire. I've also been asked about fuel shortages in Yemen. Last month, no commercial fuel imports were allowed through Hodeidah port. That's zero. In recent years, more than half of commercial fuel imports had been coming through Hodeidah. This is the first time since the escalation of the conflict in 2015 that we've seen the level drop to zero. This is driving shortages and price rises. Fuel prices have doubled or even tripled in some areas. This is in turn pushing up, of course, the price of food, water, and other goods, complicating humanitarian needs. We call on all parties to urgently find a sustainable solution that will allow commercial fuel imports to resume through all ports. And turning to Ethiopia, where the situation in Tigray remains extremely concerning, with conflict continuing to drive population displacement and reports of some villages being completely emptied. Over the past week, a large influx of displaced people have reached Shire from western Tigray, following the announcement by the Office of the Prime Minister that humanitarian agencies will have access to operate in Tigray on the basis of notification to the Ministry of Peace. Humanitarian partners have started to use the new email notification system to deploy international staff to Tigray, and that is, of course, a change from the system we used to have, where we used to have to seek permission. Despite some progress in accessible areas, especially in the eastern zone, many people in need of assistance are in hard-to-reach areas due to insecurity, logistical hurdles, administrative impediments, and limited capacity and resources. Disruption in basic services continue to pose serious challenges to humanitarian efforts while putting people further at risk. Access to health, water, education, food, and farming and livelihood opportunities is severely compromised throughout the region. With partners able to access hundreds of thousands of people in Tigray, it is vital that additional funding be released immediately to enable humanitarians to increase the scale and scope of the response. Some updates from the Central African Republic, which, as you know, will have the second round of legislative elections over the weekend, and I wanted to give you some information about the support being provided by our peacekeeping mission. Denise Brown, the mission's deputy special representative, had discussions with the president of the National Electoral Authority to encourage the adoption of measures to facilitate electoral operations. Meanwhile, it was reported that 96% of poll workers have completed their training with the mission's support. 23% of them are women. Campaigning for the election is scheduled to end today. The mission also calls on those involved to ensure peaceful elections, to refrain from violence, and resolve any dispute through established constitutional means. And staying on the country, our friends and colleagues at UNICEF and the World Food Programme are telling us that recent spikes in violence has grave consequences on children's health. At least 24,000 children under the age of 5 across 14 of the country's 35 health districts are at risk of severe acute malnutrition. The agencies are calling on all parties to the conflict to allow safe access to children. Despite growing insecurity, UNICEF and WFP say their teams on the ground are intensifying efforts to reach the most vulnerable children and mothers. They're pre-positioning food supplies in case to ensure that there's no disruption of the delivery of aid, and they're also deploying mobile clinics to bring health and nutrition support to remote and displaced communities. 6 of the 35 districts currently have no resources or capacity to respond to the needs of the children. Both programs are sadly critically underfunded, and both agencies are calling for additional support. Turning to Nigeria, I can tell you the Secretary General strongly condemns the reported abduction of another group of students in that country, this time from the Federal College of Forestry Mechanization in Kaduna. He understands that some of the students have reportedly been rescued by the Nigerian security forces. The Secretary General calls for the immediate and unconditional release of those students that remain in captivity. The Secretary General urges the authorities to safeguard schools and to ensure the right of education in a safe environment. As you know, attacks on schools and other educational facilities constitute a grave violation of children's rights and human rights more broadly. The Secretary General underscores that schools must remain a safe space for children to learn without fear of violence or kidnapping or any other attacks on them. A couple of notes from Myanmar. The head of the UN Women, Phumzile Mblako Nduka, expressed her deep concern over the targeting and disproportionate violence against women being recorded in Myanmar since the start of the violence. The executive director said this repressive response has already taken the lives of 6 women and resulted in the arrest of close to 600 women, including young women, LGBTIQ activists, and civil society participants. In addition, those in detention also reportedly experiencing sexual harassment and violence. UNICEF, for its part, condemned the strongest possible terms the use of force against children, including live ammunition, and the arbitrary detention of children. They continue to call on security forces to immediately refrain from violence. As of yesterday, UNICEF tells us that at least 9 children have reportedly been killed and at least 8 have been severely wounded, while more than 700 children have been arbitrarily detained. Many of those arrested or detained are being held incommunicado without access to legal counsel or their families, which is a violation of their human rights. And update from Somalia, where we are told that 34 districts in the country are experiencing serious water shortages following poor seasonal rains in 2020. More than 83,000 people have been displaced by the water shortages since November of 2020. Humanitarian needs are also set to increase with La Nina weather conditions anticipating early in the year, on top of the conflict, insecurity, and other drivers of crisis. According to our humanitarian colleagues, nearly 1.6 million Somalis are facing acute food insecurity. Without sustained humanitarian assistance, this number could increase up to 2.7 million through June. Water shortages may also escalate the risk of disease outbreaks. Despite funding and security-related access challenges, humanitarian partners are delivering water to more than 300,000 people in impacted areas. In 2021, 5.9 people in Somalia need humanitarian assistance. That's up from 5.2 in 2020. We require $1.09 billion to help 4 million people and the most vulnerable among them. As of today, 2.5% of the funding has been received. That's 2.5% of the 1.09 billion that's needed. Some good news on COVID. Our teams in Cabo Verde tell us that the country has received 24,000 doses of COVID-19 vaccines through the COVAX facility. This is the first batch of 100,000 doses that will arrive in through May of this year. The UN resident coordinator, Ana Patricia Grassa, said this is a time of renewed hope and a testimony to the solidarity of the world needs to respond to global challenges. The UN team will help authorities start vaccination programs on March 18th. Health professionals, people with chronic diseases, elderly, teachers, and others will be prioritized. I can't pronounce that word, sorry. And from Rwanda, our colleagues at UNHCR welcomed the Rwandan government's vaccination against COVID-19 of more than 400 refugees. This makes Rwanda one of the few countries to actually vaccinate refugees. This a great example, which we hope that other countries will follow. Also, a couple of notes for the upcoming events. I want to flag that on Sunday, March 14th, will mark 2 years since tropical cyclone Idai hit Mozambique, which had been followed by Kenneth in April. Later today, we will share with you under embargo a message from the Secretary General stressing that the people of Mozambique urgently need our help to tackle the triple threat of conflict, climate, and COVID. That will be sent out this afternoon. The 65th session of the Commission of the Status of Women starts on Monday, and in light of the evolving COVID-19 situation and taking into account the latest guidance from the Secretary General and WHO, the meeting will take place in a hybrid format with mostly virtual meetings. The meeting's priority theme is women, full and effective participation and decision-making in public life, as well as the elimination of violence for achieving gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls. The Secretary General will speak at the opening on Monday, and on Tuesday he will take part in a town hall meeting with members of civil society. It will be on web TV, and we will share with you his opening remarks for Monday, either later today or over the weekend. So check your emails. Madame, and then we'll go to Monsieur.
Stéphane, could we have an update on the investigation of the killing of the Italian? Because the DRC government has repeatedly accused the Rwandan Hutu rebels of killing the people.
Well, so let me tell you what I know is that for our part, the Department of Safety and Security is conducting a review. They are continuing to do so. They are keeping in touch with the Congolese and the Italian authorities. The criminal investigations are the responsibilities, first and foremost, of the Congolese authority, and of course of the Italian authorities, given the killing of the Italian ambassador and the Carabinieri. We will be working with those, cooperating with those investigations, and I would encourage you to get a hold of my colleague Greg Barrow at WFP, who may have more an update. I can share those with you. Mr. Bays and Ms. Lederer.
I'm sure the Secretariat has seen an open letter from the UN Association of the UK to Prime Minister Boris Johnson about the replacement for Mark Lowcock, who is leaving his job, urging a transparent, inclusive and merit-based process, and saying ring-fencing roles excludes a large swathe of global talent and creates a perception of partiality. A letter signed by numerous ambassadors, officials, a former Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. What does the Secretary General make of that letter?
I don't know if the Secretary General has seen the letter. I've seen it. I've seen this letter, which is addressed to the Prime Minister of the UK. The the selection process for Mr. Lowcock is ongoing, and I think if you look at the overall, the senior management team that the Secretary General has put forward, I think it is a powerful team full of extremely strong and capable leaders, and with full gender parity, and the Secretary General will continue on that track.
But that's not answering the central point. There are some countries that hold on to successively hold on to individual high-level important jobs and don't give them up. And does the Secretary-General feel that this is a breach of a 1992 General Assembly resolution that says, as a general rule, no national of a member state should succeed a national of that state in a senior post, and there should be no monopoly on senior posts by nationals of any state or group of states? When you've had 5 in a row French heads of peacekeeping, 4 in a row under Secretary Generals for Humanitarian Affairs, 3 in a row US heads of the Department of Political Affairs, you're not complying with the resolution, are you?
The Secretary General is the chief administrative officer of this organization. His focus is on putting together the best possible team, and he will continue in that vein.
And he'll do it even if it's in defiance of a General Assembly resolution.
He will continue to work towards that aim. Thank you. Edie.
Thank you, Steph. Are there any details on why the delivery of food and fuel to Yemen has suddenly been totally blockaded? Who's responsible, and what's being done to try and open the port?
Well, I think on the distribution of food, I think in some areas, Mr. Lowcock kind of went into it. On the fuel, these are issues that we've taken up with the coalition, and overall, I think we are. Overall, it is important that all the parties involved in this conflict focus, one, on resuming an active participation, or at least, I mean, not say resuming, but on finding a solution, a political solution to the current crisis, engaging actively with Mr. Griffiths in our effort to find a nationwide ceasefire, and of course take no decision that harm the humanitarian well-being of the Yemeni people, which I think, as Mr. Beasley said in a much more eloquent way than I can, is just terrifying.
What specifically is Mr. Griffiths doing to try and get Hodeida Port open again to fuel tanker delivery?
This is part of conversations that Mr. Griffiths and others are having with all the parties involved, because obviously with zero fuel coming in, it has a direct impact on food prices, which has a direct impact on people's ability to get food. Okay, let's go to, I think I'll go to James Reinl, and then Sherwin, and then to some.
Thank you, Stéphane. Can you hear me?
Not very loudly for once, James.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There we go.
I'll try
That's
and speak up.
perfect.
We just had Mr. Beasley speaking with you. He mentioned this new famine relief fund for Yemen, which is being organized by Ripplewood Holdings CEO Tim Collins. A number of heads of UN agencies have been dealing with Mr. Collins about this. I'm wondering, has it reached the 38th floor yet? Has Mr. Guterres spoken to anyone about it? And does he have any concerns about where the money comes from and how it's going to be spent?
No, it's a good question. I tell you, I have nothing to add to what Mr. Beasley has said, but I will try to get a bit more on it. Okay. Sorry, what did I say? Ibtisam and then Sherwin.
Thanks, Steph. I want to go to the Mr. Beasley's press briefing and the fact that my second question that he didn't answer regarding weapon delivery to parties to the conflict. So I throw the question to you. Does the Secretary General believe that the P5, but any country should stop delivering weapons to parties to the conflict, in any conflict, but specifically since we are talking about Yemen in Yemen? Thank you.
Listen, the absurd amount of money that is being spent on sending weapons to Yemen could be spent on helping the Yemeni people get food, rebuild the healthcare system. Yemen doesn't need more weapons. Yemen needs political leaders who will agree on a peaceful way forward and bring solutions to the people of Yemen.
I have a follow-up, but that's the part of the parties to the conflict, and you have been talking about that several times. My question is actually about countries who are selling these weapons. Are you calling on them to stop sending weapons?
I think I answered the first part of your question. I said the money spent on weapons would be better spent someplace else. Sherwin.
Thanks, Steph. King Goodwill Zwelithini Kabeguzulu of the Zulu Nation passed on earlier today. Is there any comment from the Secretary General on the King's passing? Of course, the King of the largest ethnic group in South Africa.
We, of course, send our deepest and most sincere condolences to the King's family and his friends, and to all the people of South Africa, as well as the government of South Africa. Iftikhar.
Thank you, Steph. My question is about Ms. Lyons, the UNAMA chief trip to Doha and the talks with Mr. Khalid Zad and others. What was the message she got? What I mean is, what is the United Nations expected to do in the light of Secretary Blinken's letter going forward in the peace process?
Well, listen, we, as I've said, we stand ready to assist the parties as requested. Our role must and will always be in support of the Afghan people, must be agreeable to the parties in the conflict. The Secretary General and others have been in touch with the Americans, the Russians, and the Qataris and the Turks and many other parties, and we feel there is positive momentum from the international community in terms of coordination and moving forward on helping the Afghan parties find peace for the sake of the people of Afghanistan.
Has the United Nations been formally told to organize some meeting as in Secretary Blinken's letter?
Look, we are continuing our discussions, and we will do whatever we can to support and do what is requested of us within the framework I've already spoken about. Toby, and then Abdelhamid.
Hi, thanks, Steph. David Beasley today said that the Houthis are currently, he seems to be well liked by the Houthis, and their sentiments towards him, he said, have gone back and forth in the past. I'm wondering, have they warmed towards Mr. Griffiths as well? Is he experiencing a positive moment right now in his relations there? Thank you.
Listen, I can't speak to Mr. Griffiths on that. I know that Mr. Griffiths contacts with whether it's the government of Yemen, the Houthi Ansar Allah, or the Saudi-led coalition is constructive, and the lines remain open, and we are exploiting that opening as much as we possibly can. Abdelhamid.
Thank you, Stéphane. Yesterday, 5 Palestinian children were dragged and detained by heavily armed Israeli soldiers in the southern part of Hebron. And their crime was they were picking up a wild vegetable very popular with Palestinians during the season. And a video of this arrest and roughing of the 5 children was released yesterday by B'Tselem. Have you seen the video, and if you have any position on that?
No, to be honest, I personally have not seen that video, but we will look into the incident and comment accordingly. Gloria.
My question is, Ray, the violence of women in Myanmar. Where are all the women's groups, the powerful women politicians, the top people of the world, including Kamala Harris, helping these women and seeing that peacekeepers get in there and save the women? It's not right.
Okay. Well, I can only speak for UN Women. I think they've issued a very strong statement. Great. Seeing no more questions, we want